I always thought betrayal would come, loud, shattered glass, screaming matches, a fight in the driveway. But mine walked in quiet. Friday night, Dallas, a bar I'd never stepped into before. I was supposed to be home under the hood of my old F-150, but something in me needed answers. She told me she was with Amanda. My gut told me otherwise. So I drove, and there she was, Lauren, my wife of 12 years, hair tucked back, laughing like she hadn't laughed with me in a decade. And the man across from her leaning in hand, brushing hers. Ryan. A name I didn't know, a face I'll never forget. I didn't yell, didn't swing, didn't make a scene. I just stood there long enough for her to see me, and when her eyes met mine, the whole damn room went silent. That was the moment I realized betrayal doesn't explode. It freezes you, and it never lets go. Her eyes locked on mine, and the sound drained out of the bar. No music. No laughter, just silence, heavy enough to crush my chest. For 12 years, those eyes had been home. Tonight, they were foreign territory. I didn't shout, didn't throw a punch. I just turned slow and steady the way a man does when he knows there's no going back. My boots hit the hardwood floor like gunshots, each step louder than any words I could have said. Behind me, I heard the scrape of her chair, the panic in her breath. "Michael, wait." Her voice cracked, but I didn't. I pushed open the door, Texas night air rushing in sharp and cold. Out there, neon lights buzzed, cars rolled by, and life kept moving. My hand found the truck keys in my pocket, metal biting into my palm. One thought burned clean through the fog. If she chose another man, then I'd choose silence. I drove home on autopilot headlights, cutting through the dark Texas streets. Every red light felt like a test of patience, every mile heavier than the last. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were stiff around the wheel, but my mind was stone cold clear. I walked inside, no lights on, no music, just the echo of a house that suddenly didn't feel like mine. The kitchen smelled faintly of her perfume, but it didn't stop me. I went straight to the bedroom, slipped the wedding band off my finger, and set it on the dresser, face up. No note, no explanation, just a circle of gold staring back at me, a reminder of what had broken. I grabbed a duffel, tossed in jeans, boots, and a few shirts. Essentials only. The ring stayed behind like a marker on a grave. 12 years reduced to silence and a piece of metal. And I was done begging ghosts. I didn't go to a buddy's couch, didn't call family, didn't announce a thing. At 2 a.m, I sat in the cab of my truck, scrolling listings until I found a short-term rental in Irving. Nothing special, 1-bedroom, cracked blinds, a carpet that had seen better days. But it had 4 walls, a door that locked, and most important, no memories. By sunrise, I was hauling a duffel and toolbox up the narrow stairwell, the silence following me like a shadow. The apartment smelled of dust and leftover takeout, but to me it smelled like freedom. I set down my bag, brewed gas station coffee in a chipped machine, and stood there watching the steam rise. No photos on the walls, no laughter down the hall, no perfume in the air. Just me and the hum of the fridge. Some men burn the house down when they're betrayed. Me, I rented a new address and let the old one die. By Monday, I was sitting in a cramped office downtown, the kind with beige walls and stacks of files leaning like tired soldiers. The lawyer was older gray at the temples, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. He listened as I laid out the facts. No drama, no excuses, just the truth as I'd seen it. When I was done, he leaned back, folded his hands, and asked one question that cut deeper than anything Lauren had said. "Do you want to save the marriage or save yourself?" The words sat heavy between us. I stared at the floor, the scuff marks on my boots, the ring-shaped indent still fresh on my finger. I thought about 12 years, about the silence at that bar, about the hollow look in her eyes when she saw me standing there. My answer came out low but steady. I'm done patching holes in a ship that's already sunk. I need to save myself. Walking out of that office, I knew papers and signatures wouldn't keep me steady. Discipline would, so I set 3 rules written in a cheap spiral notebook I bought at a gas station on the way back to Irving. Rule 1, no contact unless it's about the house or the law. No midnight texts, no desperate calls. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to go through the paperwork. Rule 2, no surveillance. No checking her social media, no driving past familiar places, no asking friends for updates. I wasn't going to chain myself to curiosity. Rule 3, 1 small win every day. Lift weights, fix something broken, put in extra hours at the shop. Anything to remind me I still had control over at least one corner of my life. These rules weren't romantic. They weren't soft. They were steel rails on a broken road. And without them, I knew I'd crash before I ever found peace. Word spread faster than I expected. One buddy from the shop texted, "Late man, I heard about you and Lauren. You okay?" Another left a voicemail voice tight, like he was scared I might do something reckless. By Thursday night, I met Mike and Tom at a different bar. Brighter lights, pool tables, clacking. They tried to circle the subject, ordering me a beer, throwing half-hearted jokes. Finally, Tom asked, "You gonna fight for her, or what?" I just shook my head. The silence stretched long enough for both of them to realize my answer wasn't changing. They wanted a story, an explosion, maybe even tears. All I gave them was stillness. A man doesn't need to explain when he's already decided. They looked at each other unsure, like I was a puzzle missing too many pieces. I finished my beer, set the glass down, and stood. "Appreciate it, fellas," I said, "but some things don't need talking through." The first text came the next morning. "Michael, please, let me explain." By noon, there were 3 more. That night, a voicemail. Her voice was shaky, rehearsed, like she'd been crying between sentences. I played it once, then deleted it. Rule number 1, no contact, unless it's about the house or the law. I wasn't about to break on day 3. Still, the screen lit up again and again. "It's not what you think. We can fix this. I miss you." Every buzz of the phone was a temptation, a hook waiting for me to bite. But I'd already seen enough. Words couldn't unmake the image of her leaning in, laughing, brushing hands with another man. At night, I powered the phone off completely, laid it face down on the counter like a weapon I refused to touch. Some men bleed out through anger, others through begging. I chose silence, sharp and clean, the only answer she was going to get. Friday evening, the Texas sun was bleeding orange across the shop yard when I walked out. My boots were heavy with grease and dust, my mind already set on nothing more than a hot shower and quiet. That's when I saw her Lauren leaning against her SUV at the far end of the lot. Arms crossed, eyes red like she'd been waiting all day. For a second, my chest tightened. 12 years doesn't just vanish, no matter how bad the break. She pushed off the hood when she spotted me, took a step forward. "Michael, please, just 5 minutes." My coworkers glanced over, then quickly looked away, giving us space. I shook my head once, slow, steady. "This isn't the place I said." She tried again, reaching out like she could pull me back with one touch. I stepped past, keys in hand. "Not now. Not here. Maybe not ever." The silence that followed was louder than any argument. That night, the apartment felt smaller than ever. I lay on the mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, counting every hum from the old fridge in the kitchen. Back home, there had always been noise, Lauren brushing her teeth, opening drawers too loud, humming along to some late-night commercial jingle. I used to find it annoying. Now the silence pressed in like a weight on my chest. My phone buzzed once on the counter. I didn't move. I'd already decided she wouldn't get an answer. Around midnight, the AC kicked on, rattling through the vents. For a moment, I closed my eyes, hoping exhaustion would win. It didn't. My thoughts looped her laugh at the bar, her eyes widening when she saw me. I turned on my side, pulled the thin blanket tight, and whispered into the dark. Not my problem anymore. The words sounded foreign, but they were the only thing holding me together until morning. Lying awake the next morning, coffee bitter in my hand, I started replaying the years like old film reels. It wasn't one fight, one lie, or one night that broke us. The cracks had been forming long before Ryan ever showed up. I remembered the dinners where we sat across from each other, both scrolling our phones. I remembered her asking if I'd work late again, and me answering with a grunt, eyes still on the truck I was rebuilding in the garage. Somewhere along the way, our conversations turned into schedules, our laughter into background noise. She drifted to conferences I buried myself in overtime, and neither of us called it what it was: distance. Betrayal didn't start in that Dallas bar. It started in our living room, when silence became easier than honesty. I could blame her for stepping out, but deep down I knew I'd left the door cracked open years ago, and she walked through it. The counselor's office was quiet, too quiet. A small lamp in the corner, 2 chairs angled toward each other, a box of tissues on the table like a warning. Lauren sat across from me, hands knotted in her lap. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe it was the weight she carried now. The counselor started gently asking what brought us there. Lauren opened her mouth, but I cut in before she could twist it. She lied. She said she was with Amanda. She wasn't. I saw her with him. My voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. The words were plain, fact-heavy as concrete. Lauren's eyes filled, but I didn't look away. The counselor nodded slowly, jotting notes. Naming it is the first step, she said, but you both need to decide if truth leads to repair or to release. I leaned back in my chair. For me, the truth means I can't unsee it. That's all. Driving back from that session, I couldn't shake the counselor's words. Repair or release. Truth doesn't just point one way. It reflects. I thought about the years I'd spent answering her questions with shrugs, burying myself in engines instead of conversations. I called it being tired. I called it needing space. But really, it was easier to tighten bolts than to loosen my own chest and say what I felt. I blamed Lauren for choosing someone else, and she was guilty. But my silence had been laying bricks, one by one, building the wall between us long before Ryan ever showed up. That didn't excuse her betrayal. Nothing did. Still facing it straight, I couldn't pretend I was just a victim. I had been absent even when I was in the room. And now I was paying the price for letting words die in my throat. In the end, silence doesn't save you. It starves you. A week later, Tom slapped me on the back after work and said, "Come on, man, let's hit a bar. Plenty of women out there." Best way to forget one is with another. The old me might have gone drown the ache in beer and distraction. But I'd written my rules for a reason. Rebounds don't heal. They just patch the hole with thinner glass. So I shook my head. Not tonight. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour gym off Highway 183. The place smelled like sweat and metal, nothing glamorous. I racked weights, put in my earbuds, and worked until my arms shook and my lungs burned. Every rep felt like hammering steel into the rails I was building for myself. On the drive back to Irving, my chest hurt, but it was the good kind, the kind that meant I was choosing pain with a purpose, not another mistake to add to the pile. That night, after the gym, I sat on the edge of the bed in that bare apartment, sweat still cooling on my skin. My hands were shaking not from the weights, but from the flood of memories. I saw my father, tall, wiry hands scarred from years in the machine shop. He wasn't a man of many words, but when I was 16 and took my first real hit on the football field, he pulled me up by the face mask and said, "Stand tall when it hurts. That's when it matters most." Back then, I thought he meant sports. Now, sitting alone at 40, I realized he meant life. Pain comes for every man, sometimes in a hospital room, sometimes in a courtroom, and sometimes in a bar where you least expect it. But the rule stays the same. Don't fold, don't hide. Stand straight, breathe deep, and let the hurt shape you, not break you. The next morning, I found myself repeating those words like a prayer, stand tall when it hurts. I carried them into the shop, grease on my hands, the clang of tools echoing off the concrete walls. Every time the ache crept back the image of Lauren laughing with Ryan, the empty side of the bed, I straightened my shoulders and forced myself to breathe through it. My father never taught me how to dodge pain. He taught me how to outlast it. I remembered his funeral, the way I held my mother's arm while she shook, and how he would have hated to see me crumble now. So I kept my chin up at work, answered questions short and steady, never letting on that my world was cracked in half. At night, in that lonely apartment, I wrote his words on a torn page from my notebook and taped it to the fridge. A reminder, grief bends a man, but it doesn't have to break him. That weekend, I walked back into the old house to grab the last of my things. The place was half empty, but one piece still sat in the living room, the big brown love seat we'd bought the year we married. I remembered us carrying it through the front door, laughing as it scraped the frame, swearing it would last forever. 12 years later, it sat there like a tombstone. I stared at it for a long minute, then pulled out my phone and listed it online. Used sofa fair condition, $50 pickup only. An hour later, a young couple showed up smiling, talking about their first apartment. I helped them load it into the back of their truck. When the girl asked if it had a story, I just said, "It's had enough." Watching them drive away, I felt lighter. Some memories you keep, others you sell cheap, just to make room for air again. The lawyer advised me to separate accounts, so I did. I sat at that shaky kitchen table in the Irving apartment laptop, open bank statements spread out like evidence. Line by line, I combed through 12 months of charges. Some were routine groceries, utilities, gas, but others stopped me cold. A boutique hotel downtown, 2 dinners at a steakhouse I'd never set foot in, charges from rideshare apps I knew she rarely used, always late at night, always near the convention center. My jaw tightened. It wasn't just that night at the bar, it had been building months in the shadows. Betrayal rarely comes out of nowhere. It leaves breadcrumbs, and I was finally following them. I highlighted every questionable line, saved the files, and closed the laptop. For a moment, the anger surged hot, almost enough to make me pick up the phone. But Rule 1 stood. No contact. Not about feelings, not about lies. Only the law. Sunday afternoon, Mike dropped by the shop while I was tightening bolts on an old Chevy. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching me work. After a while, he sighed. "Look, man, women make mistakes. Maybe you just let it slide. Don't throw away 12 years over one screw-up." His words echoed in the garage, sharp and careless. I set the wrench down, slowly wiped the grease from my hands, and looked him dead in the eye. "Mike, I didn't throw anything away. She did. My job now is to stand where I said I would on my own 2 feet." He shifted uncomfortable like he'd stepped on live wire. The silence stretched, but I didn't fill it. Some men mean well, but they don't understand the kind of wound that doesn't close. I picked up the wrench again, turned back to the engine, and said, "Don't ask me to pretend broken trust is just a dent we can buff out." One night, I sat at the kitchen table in that bare apartment, a blank sheet of paper staring back at me. The silence was thick, the kind that makes a man want to speak just to hear something. So I picked up a pen and started writing. I wrote everything I couldn't say out loud, how I hated the lie, how I missed the woman she used to be, how I wished I'd fought harder before it was too late. I wrote about the hurt, the anger, but also about the truth I couldn't carry it anymore. By the time I finished, 3 pages lay covered in ink, shaking lines that looked nothing like the steady hands I use at the shop. I folded the papers, walked outside, and lit them with my old Zippo. The flames curled the edges, turned the words to ash. I didn't send them, didn't keep them. Forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. A letter came in the mail with the county seal stamped across the top. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside, plain and official, were the words I'd been expecting court date set for 30 days out. No drama, no warning, just a date circled in red on my calendar. I sat there staring at it, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the AC. This was it, the moment where 12 years of love and lies would be reduced to paperwork and signatures. Part of me felt hollow, like I'd already buried the marriage the night I saw her at that bar. Another part braced itself like I was walking into a storm I couldn't avoid. I poured a cup of coffee, leaned back in the chair, and told myself the truth straight. This isn't the end of me, it's just the end of us. And sometimes that difference is the only thing that keeps a man standing. The night before the hearing, sleep never came. I lay in the dark sheets twisted around me, the red numbers on the clock, dragging past midnight, then 2, then 4. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face at that bar, saw Ryan's hand brushing hers. My chest tightened, my jaw ached from clenching. At 6, I gave up. I pulled on my old running shoes, stepped into the Texas morning. The air was cool, damp with dew, the streets empty. I started slow, each step pounding the pavement like a release valve. Block after block, my lungs burned, but the weight on my chest began to lift. By the 3rd mile, sweat stung my eyes, and the anger bled out through every stride. I wasn't running from her, I was running for me. When I finally stopped bent over and gasping, I realized something pain doesn't disappear, but it moves if you do. The courthouse smelled like paper and old carpet, the kind of place where lives get divided by signatures. Lauren sat across the table, eyes swollen but dry hands folded tight like she was holding on to something that no longer existed. The judge read through the agreements, monotone, efficient. My lawyer slid the papers in front of me, pen balanced on top. For a moment, I just stared at the lines where my name was supposed to go. 12 years of dinners, road trips, Christmas mornings, all reduced to black ink on white pages. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. No words, no speeches, just my name written clean and sharp. When I set the pen down, I felt lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because I had finally chosen to stop carrying it. I looked at the judge, then at the door. No goodbye, no second glance. I was already gone. Back at the apartment, I started boxing up the few things I had left from the old house. Tools, work, boots, a couple of photo frames I hadn't decided whether to keep or toss. The silence felt heavier than usual, so I grabbed my phone and pulled up an old playlist I hadn't touched in years. George Strait, Alan Jackson, Brooks and Dunn. The steel guitars and steady rhythms filled the room. Voices I grew up on, voices that had carried me through breakups long before marriage ever crossed my mind. As I taped up a box, a line hit me harder than I expected. She's gone, and I don't feel like talking. My throat tightened, but instead of shutting the music off, I let it play louder. I stacked the boxes against the wall, each one like a brick, sealing off the past. Heartache didn't vanish with the songs, but it found a rhythm. And sometimes that's enough. The day after the last box was stacked, I needed space bigger than 4 walls, so I threw a duffel in the back of my F-150 and headed west. Highway 287 stretched like a ribbon under the morning sun, the kind of Texas road that dares you to keep driving until the horizon swallows you whole. Windows down, the hot wind whipped through the cab, carrying dust diesel and freedom. Mile by mile, the weight in my chest loosened. Out here, there was no courthouse, no empty bed, no unanswered texts, just sky so wide it made my problems look small. I stopped at a roadside diner, ate eggs off a chipped plate, and traded nods with strangers who didn't know my story and didn't need to. Back on the road, I caught myself humming with the radio, something I hadn't done in months. The pain was still there, sure, but for the first time, it wasn't steering the wheel. When I got back from the road, I knew drifting wouldn't save me, so I built a schedule sharp enough to cut through the fog. Alarm at 4:45. By 5 Huzro, I was in the gym, the place still half-dark weights clanging like church bells for men who needed discipline more than prayer. Sweat hit the floor before the sun hit the sky. By 6:30, showered coffee in hand, I was rolling into the shop. 7 sharp tools in my grip engines opened the world making sense again through grease and steel. Routine became my lifeline. Every rep, every wrench, every clock-in was proof I could still control something. The hurt didn't vanish, but it lost ground pushed back by structure. Folks at the shop noticed. "You're early these days," one said. I just nodded. No need to explain. Some men drink through heartbreak. I chose to outwork mine. And in that grind, I started to feel like myself again. One evening, just as I was closing up the shop, my phone buzzed with a message from an old mutual friend. Lauren's mom's in the hospital, not doing well. For a moment, I just stood there, the smell of oil and metal heavy in the air, memories pulling me back to Sunday dinners at her parents' house, her mom always setting an extra plate for me. My chest tightened, but the rules I'd written still stood. I wasn't going to open the door wide again, not even for this. Still, some things deserve respect. I sat in the cab of my truck, thumb hovering over the screen, and typed, "I'm sorry to hear about your mom," wishing her strength. Nothing more, nothing less. I hit send, locked the phone, and started the engine. The message wasn't for Lauren. It was for the woman who once treated me like family. That kindness deserved at least one line of mine back. A week later, Sarah from our old circle called out of the blue. She danced around small talk before finally saying it. "That guy, Ryan, he's out of the picture. Haven't seen him with Lauren in weeks." I let the words hang there, waiting for a sting that never came. Maybe she expected me to feel vindicated to take comfort in his absence. But it didn't matter. Ryan was never the problem. He was just the proof. The real break started long before his name entered my life. I thanked her for the call, kept my voice even, then hung up. Back in the shop, I wiped my hands on a rag, the smell of grease grounding me. People come and go, some take your trust with them, some leave scars. But Ryan, he was just a ghost passing through. I had no room left in my head for ghosts. My fight wasn't with him, it was with myself. At our next meeting, my lawyer spread the paperwork across his desk, glasses low on his nose. He pointed to the numbers, the split of property, the house, the accounts. "You could push for more," he said. "Given the circumstances, the court would probably side with you." I leaned back, arms crossed, the weight of 12 years heavy on my shoulders. He studied me for a moment, then added, "But don't mistake punishment for victory. Don't win by making her lose." The words cut through me sharper than any legal term. I thought about the late nights, the silence, the betrayal in that bar. Part of me wanted payback, sure, but another part knew revenge doesn't fill the hole, it just digs it deeper. I nodded slowly. "Fair split. Clean break." He smiled faintly, tapping his pen. That day, I walked out with no extra leverage, no trophies, just the sense that I was finally learning the difference between justice and spite. Mike cornered me at the shop one Friday, grease still on my hands. "Listen, man," he said, grinning like he had the cure for everything. "My wife's got a friend, single, sweet. Think you should meet her." I could tell he meant well, trying to pull me back into the world, patch the holes with company. For a second, the idea tempted me. Walk into a restaurant, sit across from someone new, pretend none of this weight existed. But then I thought about the rules I'd written about healing before repeating mistakes. Jumping into a date wasn't moving forward, it was just running in circles. I wiped my hands on a rag and shook my head. Not yet, Mike. His grin faded, replaced by quiet concern. I clapped him on the shoulder before walking back to the truck. Some things can't be rushed, I said. Truth was, I wasn't afraid of meeting someone new. I was afraid of meeting myself unprepared. The date stared back at me from the calendar, our wedding anniversary. 12 years marked by a red circle I used to look forward to. I could have stayed home, let the memories drown me. Instead, I packed a tent, a sleeping bag, and drove out to Lake Ray Roberts, north of Dallas. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a world away from courtrooms and empty apartments. I built a small fire, listened to the crackle, and let the silence wrap around me. For once, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. I cooked beans in a tin pan, drank black coffee from a dented thermos, and watched the stars spill across the sky. No fancy dinner, no photographs, no toast to promises broken. Just me, the fire, and the sound of the wind through the trees. The day that once belonged to us now belonged to me. And that felt more like survival than sadness. A message came late one evening. Michael, please, one last time. Just talk to me. I stared at the screen for a long while, the rules circling in my head. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let silence speak for me. But another part knew that closure sometimes required a door to be shut in person. I agreed on my terms, public place, 30 minutes, nothing more. We met at a coffee shop near downtown Dallas, the kind where nobody lingers too long. She walked in, looking tired, eyes shadowed, shoulders bent. When she sat down, I kept my hands around the cup heat, seeping into my palms. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I checked my watch and said, "You've got half an hour. Use it." Her eyes watered, but I stayed steady. This wasn't about reopening wounds. It was about making sure they finally closed. Lauren's words spilled fast, like she'd been rehearsing them for weeks. "It was a mistake. I was lonely. I didn't mean to hurt you." Her voice cracked, tears sliding down her cheeks as she reached for a napkin. The coffee shop's chatter went on around us, but at our table time felt frozen. I let her speak. Every excuse, every apology, every desperate attempt to stitch something back together that was already ash. I didn't interrupt, didn't argue. I just listened steady, like a man at a graveside letting someone say their last prayer. When she finally stopped, eyes red and hands trembling, she whispered, "Do you still love me?" My throat tightened, but I forced the truth out clean. I love peace more than I love the past. Her face crumpled, but I didn't move. No hand to wipe her tears, no arms to pull her close. My role wasn't savior anymore. It was witness. A week later, I drove back to the house one final time. The driveway looked the same. The porch light still burned out. The same crack ran down the front step, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Lauren met me at the door, eyes swollen from another round of sleepless nights. She held out her hand, waiting. I pulled the ring of keys from my pocket, the front door, the garage, even the old shed where I kept spare parts. For 12 years, those keys had been weight in my pocket, responsibility in metal form. I dropped them into her palm, the jingle sharp in the quiet air. "They belong here, not with me," I said. She nodded, lips pressed tight. No argument, no plea this time. As I turned to leave, my hand felt lighter, almost foreign, like I'd set down more than keys. I'd set down the last tether, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without effort. She called me a few nights after I handed back the keys. Against my better judgment, I picked up. Her voice was small, cracked at the edges. "I need to tell you everything, Michael, not just that night." I sat in the dark of my apartment phone, pressed to my ear, while she laid it out piece by piece. Little lies stacked like bricks. Business trips that weren't just business. Late nights at the office that ended somewhere else. Secrets I hadn't asked for, but now carried anyway. My stomach tightened with every word, but I didn't stop her. I let her empty it all out. When she finished, there was silence, heavy finale. She waited, maybe hoping confession would buy her redemption. All I said was, "Thank you for being honest this time." Then I hung up. I didn't write it down, didn't replay it, didn't turn it into another wound. The past was hers to carry. Mine was already heavy enough. One night, sitting alone with a half-empty glass of bourbon, I caught my reflection in the window. For months, I'd been waiting on apologies that never healed me. That's when it hit. I'd never once apologized to the man staring back at me. I set the glass down, leaned forward, and whispered into the quiet, "I'm sorry. Sorry for ignoring the red flags. Sorry for pretending silence was strength when it was just fear. Sorry for letting myself carry a weight that was never mine to hold alone." The words felt strange, almost foolish, but the longer I sat there, the more they settled into my bones. I'd spent years forgiving others, family, friends, even Lauren when she didn't deserve it, but I'd never spared a single word of grace for myself. That night, I did. Not to erase the past, but to finally admit I deserved better than the man who swallowed his voice to keep the peace. For months, my old F-150 had carried a rattle I couldn't pin down. I kept telling myself I'd get to it, but between lawyers' court dates and empty nights, it stayed unfixed like me. One Saturday, I rolled it into the shop, dropped the hood, and went hunting. Hours passed, sweat soaking through my shirt until I finally found it, a loose bracket deep under the manifold. A small thing, almost invisible, but it made the whole truck sound broken. I tightened the bolts, wiped the grease from my hands, and turned the key. The engine roared smooth, steady, the rattle gone at last. I sat there listening, chest rising with something I hadn't felt in a long time, satisfaction. Machines at least made sense, find the problem, fix it, move forward. People weren't that simple, but for the first time in a long while, I realized maybe I could be. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing the noise, but about tightening what was left until it held. After fixing the truck, I turned to my apartment. Piles of things I didn't need stared back at me. Boxes of clothes I never wore, knickknacks that once filled shelves in the old house. Each one carried a memory, but not a future. So I started cutting. One trash bag for donations, another for the dumpster. Boots worn through shirts with holes, even photo frames that held more ache than joy, they all went. The more I cleared, the lighter the room felt. Empty corners didn't scare me anymore. They gave me breathing room. A mattress, a table, a few tools. My guitar, that was enough. Order where there had been clutter space, where there had been weight. I realized I'd been hoarding not just objects, but pieces of a life already gone. Letting go wasn't about erasing her. It was about making space for me. And for the first time in years, my home matched the man I was becoming. Simple, steady, unburdened. Most mornings, I stuck to my routine gym at 5, shop by 7. But one Friday, I stopped at a small coffee shop off Main Street. Nothing fancy, just brick walls, old country playing low. The girl behind the counter, dark hair, tied back sleeves rolled up, handed me a black coffee. "You look like you've been up since yesterday," she said with a grin. I smirked. "Close enough." She laughed the kind of laugh that didn't carry judgment, just curiosity. We talked for a minute about the broken espresso machine she'd been wrestling with, about my truck parked out front. Nothing deep, nothing heavy, but it felt normal. For months, every word had been tied to lawyers' memories or silence. This was different, just two strangers trading small talk over caffeine. As I left, she said, "See you around." And for the first time in a long time, I thought maybe I would. Not because I needed saving, but because I finally felt ready to smile back. After months of drifting between anger and exhaustion, I realized no one was coming to pull me back on track. So I became my own coach. I wrote 4 words on a sticky note and slapped it to the fridge. Eat, sleep, train, work. Simple, no excuses. Meals stopped being takeout eggs, chicken rice, nothing fancy but fuel. Bed by 10, up by 5, whether I slept or not. The gym wasn't just about muscle anymore. It was discipline proof that I could show up for myself. And the shop, those engines gave me structure when my mind wanted to spiral. Each day I checked the boxes. Each week I stacked small wins. It didn't make the pain vanish, but it kept it from owning me. Men like to think we need some big breakthrough to heal. Truth is, sometimes you just need 4 words and the grit to repeat them until they feel like oxygen. That night, sleep finally came, but it wasn't peaceful. In the dream, I was back in that Dallas bar. The air smelled of whiskey and cheap cologne, neon lights flickering against dark wood. I saw her again, Lauren, leaning close to Ryan, laughing like I wasn't even real. My boots felt heavy, glued to the floor, while every man in the room turned to watch me crumble. I woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding like I'd just run 10 miles. For a moment, I thought about burying my face in my hands, letting the shame wash over me. Instead, I sat up, swung my feet to the ground, and turned on the lamp. I wrote one sentence in my notebook. It was a memory, not a prophecy. Then I closed the book and sat there breathing until the panic passed. The bar couldn't touch me anymore. It was just a ghost, and ghosts only live if you let them. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Kate, the coworker Lauren once used as her cover. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Her voice was cautious, careful, like she was stepping into a room full of broken glass. "Michael, I just thought you should know. Lauren's in therapy. She's trying to work through things." I leaned against the hood of a truck rag in my hand, listening. Part of me wanted to scoff, to ask why it took Betrayal to push her into a counselor's chair, but I didn't. I just said, I hope it helps her. And I meant it. Not for us, there was no us left, but for her, because carrying your own damage without help is a heavy way to live. After we hung up, I tossed the rag aside and got back to work. Her healing was her road. Mine was already paved in another direction. I'd spent years breaking quiet promises to myself, skip the gym, stay late at work, swallow the truth, instead of speaking it. After everything fell apart, I decided to start small. One push-up turned into 10. One home-cooked meal turned into a week of eating clean. Lights out at 10, alarm at 5. Nothing dramatic, nothing Instagram-worthy, just consistency. I marked each day with an X on a wall calendar I'd tacked up in the apartment. By the 10th day, the rhythm felt less like punishment and more like structure. By the 20th, I realized I trusted my own word again. On day 30, I stood in the kitchen, coffee steaming in my hand, staring at that row of red X's. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to keep me steady. I had proven to myself that I could. Betrayal had broken my trust in others. Discipline was rebuilding my trust in me. Mike and Tom invited me out for steaks one Friday night, the kind of dinner we used to share before life got complicated. The place smelled of charcoal and butter waitresses balancing trays of sizzling plates. We ordered made small talk about work, football, the weather, but halfway through the meal, Tom set his fork down and cleared his throat. "I need to say something," he muttered. "Back when this all started, I told you maybe you should forgive her. I didn't get it then. I do now. I'm sorry." For a moment, the table went quiet, just the clatter of dishes around us. I looked at him, then nodded. "I know you meant well," I said, "but some advice can't fit another man's shoes." He gave a small smile, relief softening his face. We finished our steaks, laughter easing back in. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about knowing who stood with me, no questions asked. A month later, the plant manager called me into his office. Papers were stacked high on his desk, the smell of coffee strong in the air. He leaned back, studied me for a moment, then said, "We've been watching the way you've handled things around here. We want you to lead the next project. New line, big responsibility. It's yours if you want it." For a second, I just sat there, the weight of the offer pressing down. Me, the guy who'd been sleeping on a bare mattress, whose life had been shredded in silence, was now being trusted to carry something bigger than myself. I shook his hand, firm and steady. Walking back onto the shop floor, I felt something shift inside me. Betrayal had taken my marriage, but it hadn't taken my backbone. In fact, maybe it had sharpened it. This project wasn't just a promotion. It was proof I could still build something that lasted. One quiet Sunday, I sat at the kitchen table with a fresh sheet of paper. No lawyers, no lists of expenses, just me and the weight of 12 years behind me. Instead of rage, I wrote gratitude. Thank you for the good years, for the road trips, the inside jokes, the way we once believed in forever. The word surprised me, steady instead of bitter. I thanked the past for teaching me what I could survive, for showing me how silence can break a man and how discipline can rebuild him. When the letter was done, I folded it neatly, carried it outside, and struck a match. The paper curled and blackened, words dissolving into smoke against the Texas sky. I didn't save a copy, didn't take a photo. Some messages aren't meant to be read twice. They're meant to be released. As the last corner crumbled into ash, I felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, just ready for what comes next. The courthouse felt colder that morning, like the walls knew what was coming. My lawyer handed me the final decree pages. Crisp, signatures neat. "That's it," he said. No ceremony, no gavel striking, just a stack of paper that declared 12 years officially over. Lauren sat across the room with her attorney, eyes down, hands folded in her lap. For a moment, I studied her, searching for the woman I married, the one I once thought I'd grow old with. But all I saw was distance too wide to ever cross. I stood, shook my lawyer's hand, and walked out. The sun hit hard as I stepped onto the courthouse steps, blinding but warm. I filled my lungs with air that didn't taste of ash anymore. No goodbye, no bitterness left to pour out. Just the quiet relief of a chapter closing. For the first time, I wasn't carrying us anymore. I was carrying me, and that was enough. That night, instead of drowning in what was gone, I opened my notebook and started sketching out what I'd demand from tomorrow. Not from her, not from anyone specific, just from whoever earned a place in my life again. 5 rules, clear and simple. 1 honesty, even when it hurts. 2 respect in public and in private. 3 fight fair, no lies, no silent wars. 4 loyalty that doesn't waver when things get hard. 5 laughter, because without it, the rest won't hold. I wrote them slow, underlining each one, letting the ink sink into the page like a promise. These weren't just rules for someone else. They were rules for me too to live by, to offer back. When I set the pen down, I felt something I hadn't in a long time direction. Love had once been a blind leap. Next time, if there was a next time, it would be a choice, measured, deliberate, and earned. A few weeks later, I was driving through downtown Dallas, the radio low traffic light, and easy. As I turned a corner, there it was, the bar. Same neon sign buzzing in the window, same shadowed doorway where the world I knew had collapsed. My chest tightened for a split-second memory, pressing hard like a bruise you forget until you bump it again. Part of me wondered if she still went there, if Ryan ever walked back through those doors. But I didn't slow down. I didn't circle the block or park across the street. I just kept rolling, foot steady, on the gas. The rearview mirror caught the glow of the sign fading behind me until it was gone. That place had once been the end of everything. Now it was just another building on another street. For the first time, I realized the past couldn't chase me unless I let it. And I was done letting it. One Saturday morning, I stopped by the same coffee shop. The barista, her name was Emily, was wiping down the counter when she looked up and smiled. "You ever hike Cedar Ridge?" she asked, casual, as if she were asking about the weather. I almost said no, almost kept my walls high. But something in her tone was light, not demanding, just an invitation. "Not in a while," I admitted. She grinned. "You should come. Fresh air beats burnt coffee any day." That Sunday, I found myself lacing up boots and meeting her at the trailhead. The morning air was crisp, the path winding through pines and rocky ground. We walked side by side, no pressure, no hidden agendas. She talked about school, about her brother's guitar band. I shared a story about fixing my old truck. Nothing heavy, just 2 people moving forward step by step. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like running from the past. It felt like walking toward something new. Halfway up the ridge, we stopped to catch our breath. The city spread out behind us, quiet and distant. Emily sipped from her water bottle, then glanced at me. "So, you married?" The question was simple, innocent, but it hit harder than the climb. I could have dodged it, could have shrugged it off, but I promised myself no more lies. Not to anyone, and not to me. I looked her straight in the eye. I was. 12 years ended a few months ago. Her smile softened. Not pity, just understanding. "I'm sorry," she said. I shook my head. "Don't be. It needed to end. Sometimes silence tells you more than words ever will." She nodded, letting the answer sit, not pressing for details. For the first time, saying it out loud didn't feel like reopening a wound. It felt like closing one. The climb didn't get easier, but my chest did. Honesty had a way of lightening the load. That week, Emily and I grabbed dinner after work. Nothing fancy, just burgers and fries at a roadside diner. She talked about music, her plans for school, stories about customers that made her laugh so hard she nearly spilled her soda. I found myself smiling not because I was trying to, but because it came easy. For a moment, I felt the old habit creeping in, the urge to measure her against Lauren, to scan for red flags, to brace for betrayal. But I stopped myself. She wasn't my past. She wasn't a replacement. She was just Emily sitting across from me with mustard on her thumb, waiting for me to laugh at her joke. So I did. No shadows, no ghosts, no comparisons. Just the present exactly as it was. When I dropped her off that night, I realized something. The only way to carry new hope is to put down the scale you've been using to weigh old pain. One Sunday, I drove out to see my mom. Same little brick house I grew up in, the garden out front, still crowded with roses she refused to let die. She hugged me at the door, held on a second longer than usual, like she could measure my strength through my shoulders. We sat at her kitchen table, the smell of cornbread in the oven sunlight cutting across the linoleum. She poured me coffee, studied my face the way only a mother can, and finally asked, "How are you really, Michael?" For months, I dodged the question, mumbled about work, or changed the subject. But this time, I looked her in the eyes and said, "I'm okay, Mom. I mean it." She nodded, tears shining but not falling, and reached for my hand. No speeches, no advice, just quiet acceptance. For the first time since it all began, saying the words felt true, and she believed me. Back at the apartment, I pulled out an old wooden box my father left me. Inside was his service coin scratched from years of wear and a patch from the plant where he worked until his hands gave out. Both carried the Carter name. He used to tell me, a man doesn't just wear his name, he builds it every day. Somewhere along the line, I'd forgotten that. I'd let silence and betrayal drag it through the dirt, but now I wanted it back. I stitched Carter onto the chest of my work shirt thread, biting through fabric, each pull steady and deliberate. When I slid it on, the next morning, grease already waiting for me at the shop, I felt different. Not healed, not invincible, but grounded. My name was mine again. Not hers, not ours, just mine. And from that day forward, I promised myself every action, every word would be worthy of carrying it. One night after work, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone propped up and hit record. Not for a podcast, not for an audience, just for me. My own voice filled the empty room steadier than I expected. Lesson 1, trust your gut. If something feels off, don't bury it in silence. I paused, then continued. Lesson 2, discipline saves you when emotions can't. Eat, sleep, train, work. Keep moving. Another breath. Lesson 3, forgiveness isn't about them, it's about setting yourself free. The words came easier the longer I spoke, like I was talking to the man I used to be, or maybe to some younger guy out there who hadn't hit the storm yet. When I hit stop, the recording was only 10 minutes long, but it carried weight. I saved it in a folder called For Me. Sometimes the best audience a man can have is his future self listening back, remembering what he already survived. The alarm went off at 5, same as always. I laced up my shoes, hit the gym, then showered before most of the city was awake. By 7, I was back in my apartment brewing a fresh pot of coffee. The smell filled the room, rich and warm. No perfume, no arguments, no ghosts. Just me and the steady drip of the machine. I carried the mug to the window, steam curling into the cool morning air, and watched the sun climb slow over Dallas. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing me down, no silence thick with tension. Just quiet. I chose, not quiet, forced on me. I took a sip, closed my eyes, and let the heat roll through me. Happiness, I realized, isn't always fireworks or some grand revelation. Sometimes it's a clean shirt, sore muscles, and hot coffee in a place where peace finally fits. And I whispered to myself, this is enough. Late one evening, my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen froze me for a second. Lauren. It had been weeks. Her message was short. I'm sorry, Michael. Truly. For everything. No excuses this time, no long explanations. Just those few words. I read it twice, felt the old ache stir, then let out a long breath. There was a time when I would have written back paragraphs, begging for clarity, hoping for repair. But that time was gone. I typed a single line. I wish you peace. My thumb hovered for a moment before I hit send. That was it. No questions, no open doors, just a clean ending. I set the phone face down, poured myself another cup of coffee, and went back to the quiet. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant I could finally close the book without checking if she'd ever read the last page. A thick envelope came in the mail, final statement on the loan Lauren and I had once signed together. Back then, it felt like a promise, building a future, investing in forever. Now it was just another chain tying me to a life already gone. I wrote the last check, signed my name with steady hand, and sealed it. Dropped it in the mailbox like I was dropping a stone I'd been carrying for miles. On the walk back to my truck, the air felt different, lighter, sharper. For the first time since the split, there wasn't a single bill, a single paper, a single tie left between us. Just clean lines, no debts, no what-ifs. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and let the rumble settle deep in my chest. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence, a cleared balance, and the quiet knowledge that I finally owed nothing to her or to the past. One night, I pulled out the old spiral notebook I'd bought in those first raw days. The pages were worn, corners, bent grease smudges on the cover. Inside, my handwriting stared back at me. 3 rules. No contact unless it's business. No surveillance. One small win every day. I traced each line with my finger, remembering the man who wrote them, barely holding himself together. They had carried me through the storm, but I realized something was missing. A rule that tied them all together. So I uncapped my pen and wrote a 4th, choose yourself every time. I underlined it twice, because at the end of it all, discipline wasn't just about surviving betrayal, it was about refusing to abandon myself again. I closed the notebook, slid it back into the drawer, and felt a steadiness I hadn't known in years. The rules weren't just survival anymore. They were a roadmap. And this time, I was both the driver and the destination. One Saturday evening, I drove west until the city lights disappeared in the rear view. The highway stretched endless fields rolling out on both sides, sky painted in shades of red and gold. I pulled over on a quiet stretch near Weatherford, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air was dry, carrying the faint smell of cedar and dust. In the distance, the sun sank low, kissing the horizon with a kind of peace only Texas knows. I stood there with my hands in my pockets, chest rising slow, no weight pressing down. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't empty. It was steady, solid, alive. My heart, once a storm that never let up, finally felt calm. Not healed overnight, not perfect, but quiet in a way I could trust. I didn't need closure from her. I didn't need revenge. All I needed was this sky, this road, and the proof that peace was possible. Looking back, I used to think betrayal had stolen everything from me. My marriage, my home, my peace. But standing here now, I see it differently. That night in the bar wasn't just the end of us. It was the end of the man who stayed quiet, who carried weight that wasn't his, who forgot his own worth. Every door that slammed shut court papers, keys handed back her final message, wasn't a loss. It was an opening, a forced clearing so I could finally walk forward without dragging chains behind me. I didn't lose everything. I lost what no longer belonged. What I found was harder to break, discipline, freedom, and the strength to stand tall even when it hurt. Betrayal didn't define me. What I chose after did. If you believe that after loss, there's always another road, drop a comment, start over.